Eugene Luther Gore Vidal.
So you chose to emphasize.
No, it's too long. You can't use that as a writer's name. I was going to go into politics in the state of New Mexico and was making certain preparations for it when I was in my 20s. And I just cut the Eugene Luther off. After all, my father was Gene, and I didn't want to be another Gene, fond as I was of him. And Luther just doesn't work, so we kept to Gore Vidal. I did have in the back of my mind that if I were to run for office, he was a great power in that section in the Southwest. And a friend of his, in fact, we used to talk about that in 48, I'd been out of the Army 2 years, published my first 2 books. I would go to New Mexico, Santa Fe, settle in. The governor was a protege of my grandfather's. Jack Dempsey was his name. And I would settle in and become a politician. And Vidal is a Latin name, which is a help with the Hispanic vote. Although my family was Italian, but... So that is how I got the name, or gave myself the name by cutting it off the first two words.
What is your specific relationship to Al Gore?
Well, we've never met, but I knew his father. I love it now. Every time I'm on a program or a distant cousin of Albert Gore. Well, we're not distant at all. I have not wanted to meet him because it doesn't do you much good if you're a political commentator to be thought to be involved with the president. I discovered that during Jack Kennedy's reign, when suddenly I was not taken seriously at all, having been taken quite seriously as a commentator, because they thought that I was an apologist for him. And that was because it was irresistible not to make fun of Richard Nixon. So it seemed as though I was partisan when I wasn't, but I figured out then it does no good to be attached in any way to a political figure if you want to talk about politics, which I tend to do. So I knew young Albert was going to make himself president if he could. And though I liked his father, and his father and my grandfather were friends. We're all here in Washington. I mean, you can't say we're distant cousins. We're all, last night I had a wonderful dinner with Deborah Gordine, another cousin. And she's the granddaughter of Grady Gore. So there's Grady Gore here in the town with the Fairfax Hotel. He's the rich member of the family. There's Albert Gore from eastern Tennessee, who comes here in the House and then goes on to the Senate. And there's Thomas Pryor Gore from Mississippi, but senator from Oklahoma. All 3 cousins are here in the town, and they all 3 knew each other. I'm talking the older generation. So there's a saying in Mississippi: if a snake bites a Gore, they all puff up.
You know, you mentioned Deborah Gordine, your cousin. People who follow politics closely will remember that she had some troubles during the Reagan administration.
I would think that she was young, she was foolish, she wanted to work for Ronald Reagan. That's trouble enough.
And
the acting president.
Has she, in fact, disavowed herself from public life after that experience?
We haven't talked about public life. She's a wonderful decorator.
A decorator now.
She has her over in Georgetown. Got a wonderful shop there.
Well, speaking of public life, you talked about your aspirations to politics. You ran twice. Would you talk about those 2 bids and what happened?
Well, the first, I like to read about my humiliating defeats. This is a right-wing specialty. I doubled the vote in 1960 for Congress from upstate New York. The 29th Congressional District, which is 5 counties, very big district.
And in fact, did Harry Truman come up to introduce you during an event there?
Came up to speak for me, yes. I introduced him. And in 1959, I'd written a play called The Best Man. And I gave it to Jack Kennedy to read, as he was running for president. I was running for the House. and your eye contact is gone.
It's because I'm showing the audience the Best Man flyer, which has just been...
Oh, really?
As you speak.
Everything is behind me on this program. What is going on upstage there? I feel that there's a whole way of life. Gladiators are fighting while I'm downstage.
Would that it were that interesting.
Oh, come now. We'll do our best to enliven it downstage here.
Well, in fact, I've interrupted you right at The Best Man being written, 1959.
Yes.
You want to pick it up from there?
So, I am running for Congress. Jack is running for president. The Best Man, which is once again on Broadway, the Virginia Theater in New Manhattan. This was, in a sense, a study of presidential character. It's a character somewhat like Adlai Stevenson, something like Truman, something like Nixon. And it was written really sort of to help out Jack, because he had to Nixon would be his opponent if he got the nomination. And it was very, very important that he knock off Adlai Stevenson, who had had 2 runs. And we of the liberal end of the Democratic Party were all Stevensonians. And suddenly Jack is the insurgent. But after 2 runs, we thought that Adlai Stevenson was just not up to it. He was a very cultivated, charming man, wonderful speech maker. But he was not decisive. And his great backer was Eleanor Roosevelt, who was my neighbor on the Hudson. And she adored him. And she wanted the party to support him. And she didn't like Jack Kennedy one bit. First, he was a McCarthyite in her eyes. He was very friendly with Joe McCarthy. And, of course, she detested his father, which shouldn't have held over with him, but it did. And I remember Jack sent her son, Frank Roosevelt Jr., Walter Reuther, who was head of United Auto Workers, and me to pay a call on her at Valkill Cottage to get her to support Adlai. I was support Jack. And she read a position paper to us, which was my day for the next week. And they said, yes, but he won't make up his mind. You keep proposing him, and he keeps saying, no, I don't know if I'm running or not. Well, she said finally, Frank Roosevelt said, Ma, we don't want, you can't have somebody who doesn't know his own mind. And she said, well, that's the way he is. You can't change people. And he said, well, we know that's the way he is, and we don't want him. And with that, she went right on to support. Adlai Stevenson went to the convention, waved her finger at us, said, you must support this man. I'm losing my thing in my ear.
Tell the audience that's how you're going to hear phone calls in about 5 minutes.
This is how I hear the phone calls, which I'm sure are it's in now. So I practically hear a phone call now.
They're lined up for you, I can promise.
Right.
And in fact, how is the presidency different today as you re-release this play from the kind of presidency you captured in it in 1960 in the Jack Kennedy era?
Well, it certainly makes a monkey out of Darwin. There's been no evolution in 40 years. The audience recognizes these types. My characters, they sit there, it's sort of a thriller, and it's quite funny. People don't know. They've forgotten about realism. Life is not always tragic, and it's not always comic. It's a sort of mixture, and that is what realism was. Now everybody thinks, a serious play has got to be lugubrious, and a comedy has got to be, pratfalls. Real life is mixed, and it is a realistic play, and the audiences pick up on just about. I haven't changed a word since 1960, so it's like the time machine for them. They're walking into a 1960 meeting in which you watch over a 3-day period of this convention, two men fighting it out with an old president being the decisive voice. And they ask a lot of questions. They compare it to today, when a convention means nothing, because by March of 2000, we knew who the 2 candidates were, and you don't get the convention until June or July. So it's quite different. Also, we don't talk about money in the play. There's no hard money, soft money, no electoral reform. So the more issues are probably touched upon delicately, amusingly, wittily in the play than have been in this entire campaign as we sit here in Washington, D.C. with presidential candidates roaming the country.
First telephone call for you is from Philadelphia. Welcome to the program, and you're on for Gore Vidal.
Yes, hello, Mr. Vidal.
Yes, sir.
I'm honored to speak with you. I met James Baldwin on your birthday the year before he died. And I told him it was your birthday, and he said he didn't know, and he didn't say anything about the fact that you all knew each other until I read your memoir. I realized that you did know each other. So I was wondering if you two ever talked politics, and if so, how did you find him? And if not, how did you find Mr. Baldwin generally?
Well, I like Jimmy, and I worked the year my first book, Willowalk, came out, 1946. E.P. Dutton, the publisher, gave me a job as a reader, and I brought them Cry Holy, a book by Jimmy Baldwin, which later became Go Tell It on the Mountain. The head of E.P. Dutton, Mr. McRae, when he found out the author was black, said, "But don't you understand, I'm from Virginia." And I said, "Well, what's that got to do with it?" Well, he turned it down on the grounds that he was not going to publish a black author. First time I'd ever seen it that close. Jimmy went on, however, to publish elsewhere and did very well. Relations with Jimmy himself were always kind of edgy. He was, well, he had a lot of problems. On the one hand, he was a wonderful sort of orator and a great sermonizer. On the other hand, he was just in love with showbiz. So he would go from Martin Luther King on one day to Betty Davis on the next day. Well, it was very odd dealing with such a mercurial character. But I thought he was a great voice in his time, but I'm not so sure the novels will be remembered. I was looking at one of them the other day, and it seemed very sort of showbiz novels that he wrote. But the sermons still hold up.
Next call for you comes from a town that's been in the news quite a bit lately, Los Alamos, New Mexico. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. First off, I wanted to say when you began this series, I was always hoping you would have Gore Vidal for 3 hours. And Mr. Vidal, you mentioned Isle of the Dead earlier, which is one of my favorite movies. In the book I particularly enjoyed of yours was Screening History. In your opening line, you say, "As I now move graciously, I hope, toward the door marked exit, it occurs to me that the only thing I ever really liked to do was go to the movies." And my sentiments exactly. So my question for you, Mr. Vidal, which it's a great honor to speak to you, is, have you seen any good movies lately?
I keep seeing them, and I keep forgetting their names. There was a good Altman movie. I'm a member of the Academy, so I vote on the Oscars, and so I get to see everything. There's a very good Altman movie last year, which had the word cookie in the title. The ones I like are seldom very successful. But I think we've got a lot of interesting movie makers now. I like the Coen brothers. I like Tim Robbins. I worked as an actor with Tim Robbins and Bob Roberts, which I think is a good political movie. And I went to Los Alamos when it was a boys' school. I was there 39 to 40. And up there on the mesa, which has now been burnt a bit, and a kind of awful place. And 10 years before I got there was another writer-to-be, William Burroughs. So Los Alamos produced Burroughs and Vidal. I don't know what that means.
If you had some free time right now, would you choose to read or go to the movies?
I do both, because as a member of the Academy, I get everything practically on video cassette. So I play that, and I'm reading all the time as well. So there isn't much time to do anything but look and read.
Before we take the next call, can we talk a little bit about home? When did you choose Italy as your major place of residence?
I don't know, it's so major. I mean, I spent all last winter. I have a house in Los Angeles, in the Hollywood Hills. And I make the tired joke, arguably between Hollywood and Ravello, Italy, you can say I don't live in America at all. But as America is in my head, and as America is my subject, and wherever I am, there is America.